Case may be, welcome to Safe Children, Sane Parents, the Family Safety Podcast. I'm Jason Brick, and this is
Richard Hubbard.
And we're your hosts. To get us started, Richard, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and why safe families is important to you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I guess first and foremost, I'm a father of three and a father of three daughters. And I'm also the big brother to a little brother and three little sisters, and was raised in a family where I was I was from a lot of the time the primary male caregiver in the family. I own and run a martial arts studio, and I've been training and teaching for about 25 years accumulated. And I think that it's incredibly important. I want my children to be safe, at a very visceral level. It's what I teach, and it's how I make my living, and I think that it helps make us all not just safer but more compassionate human beings. And so that's a big reason why I do it and why I'm here. And I'd also like to say thank you, Jason, for asking me to be here. It's always nice to get a reach out from a friend, and it was a surprise to me. It was a very pleasant surprise, especially for you to ask me to come on board and help you with this thing. So I really appreciate that.
Well, aw shucks, man. The idea came to me to do a family safety podcast, and we'll get to why that happened in a minute. One of the first things that occurred to me was that podcasts with more than one host are just better podcasts. They're more interesting, they have more information, and they just tend to last longer because you got two people hassling each other to keep to the schedule. And the first person I thought to do it, the first person I thought of as a co-host was you, Richard, because of how intelligently you approach self-defense problems, because of how articulate you are, and just how well we connected at the UBBT events in general. So I'm just very, very pleased that you were willing to carve the time out of your schedule.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much.
It'd be a lot of fun.
I was just talking with my students the other night, and one of the things that we were talking about was how any teacher, and it doesn't matter what you're teaching or what you're doing, should be constantly in this place of questioning what it is that they're doing and why they're doing it. And I often go through that place where I'm like, who the hell am I to teach anybody anything? And but you go through it and you do the best that you can, and when people acknowledge the value of what you do, it's very nice. And so I appreciate that you've done that. So thank you very much.
Well, it's well deserved. It's very well deserved. Now, from my perspective, in terms of why family safety is so important to me, like you, Richard, I come from a long martial arts background. And although I don't run a school anymore, I did that for the better part of a decade. And I've been training in martial arts one way or another for more than 30 years now. And we're just going to slide right by how it can be I'm a guy that was doing anything for 30 years. I can't possibly be that old. But you bring up the point about how, as a teacher, even after you've been doing it for decades, there's a part of you that wonders, well, who the hell am I to be giving out this knowledge? And one of the places that really hits you is when somebody asks you a question, and then you don't know the answer. And every once in a while, you surprise yourself by knowing the answer.
That's true too.
Some of the questions that come to you, where you've got your kids, you're teaching your martial arts to, you've got your adults, you're preparing for competition. We always have that one or two police officers or military personnel who come in who we teach in a very different, very intense way.
Sure.
But sometimes a parent comes from the stands and says, "Hey, this scared me at the park yesterday. What should I have done?" Or one of my pet peeves is I have the parents that are spending a fairly serious amount of money getting their kids trained up and everything to keep them safe, and then I watch them go through the McDonald's drive-thru while talking on their cell phone on the way home. Right?
Indeed. Yeah.
And then, of course, the other part of my background is my wife and I met when we were both living in Japan, even though she grew up 90 miles from where I grew up. And with world travel is a very, very important part of what we do with our family. And right now I'm actually coming to y'all from Malaysia, and I'll be spending a week in Bangkok with my kids next week. And so the idea of family travel safety especially has been hugely important to me. And I started a journey 5, 6 years ago now looking for resources on family travel safety, and there are zero. And to the conversation you and I were having earlier, Richard, the information is there, especially I've found in the doctrine for close security, for a professional bodyguard.
Sure.
But it's not in any kind of way that's easily accessible to parents, brought from the perspective of parents who understand the just gut-wrenching terror that 10% of parenting is all the time.
Right.
I can't remember the name of the woman off the top of my head, but there's this wonderful quote about being a parent means spending the rest of your life with your heart wandering around outside your body.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be able to address that, and to be able to go on crazy world-spanning adventures with your kids in a way that's safe, that doesn't keep you up at night. And that's my goal for the podcast. And again, being another skilled martial artist who does a lot of studying and is a dad, I'm really glad to have you aboard.
Well, thanks. Thanks. The I just want to ask you a question real quick.
Yeah.
What, out of all of your adventure that you're having in Malaysia, and I would love to, if we were to sit here and start talking about all the questions that I want to ask you and all the things we want to talk about, we'd be here all night and we'd never get the podcast done. Yeah. But what is the one thing that you've taken from your experience here that you, when you come back to the United States, you are going to say, this is the big lesson that we learned in going and living in another country and for a significant period of time, that speaks to family travel safety and the experience of being safe?
Wow. That's a tall order. I don't know that I have an exact answer for you for that yet. I think that answer is really going to come to me when we return home and are struck with how different life in America is from life here. And then we'll get the big aha. But I will bring one thing up that has struck me from the moment I got here.
Yes, please.
You know, one of my children, my youngest is a 5-year-old boy, and he's very, very fair-skinned. He got the big Irish gene from me and the big Irish gene from my wife. You can basically see his internal organs. He's so pale. People are touching him all the time. We'll walk down the street, and a person walking the other way will reach out and pat his head.
Mm-hmm.
People come up and tickle him or rub his head just constantly. Total strangers just walk up. Waiters will pick him up and go, "Oh, pretty boy." And it's not meant in any kind of creepy way. And I've also noticed that people look out for him and for other children. Often, if he's just outside of my immediate, reach, an adult will look at him and say, "Where's your mommy? Where's your daddy?" So there's this caretaking sense. This, kids are everybody's responsibility. As much as I hate the catchphrase, "it takes a village," because most people say that as an excuse not to go ahead and help keep children safe.
Right.
But yeah, that village, that kids are everybody's responsibility, kids are everybody's to love. There's no creepy vibe to it. But in America, where touching another person's child is an aggressive and transgressive act, it took a lot of getting used to. And then kind of to answer your point, it's not something I can change about our culture, but it's something I wish I could. Because it freaked me out to begin with, but I got used to it, and now I really like it. I like the vibe here that everybody's going to look out for the kids because kids are important.
Yes.
I like the vibe that nobody's really, really freaked out about stranger abduction or stranger molestation. We'll get to some of that later on in the podcast. But everybody's taking care of everybody, and kids are each other's responsibility. And I like that vibe, and I like that attitude. But yeah, it is very strange for an American to be walking along and have somebody just reach out and pat his kid's head just at random.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The lizard brain still just kind of goes, "Protect the offspring." You have to beat that back down.
Right. Because and I think that was like number 2 on my list of 5 things, which was no local customs,
Yes.
and understand the context of the culture that you're going into. I mean, if you're driving from Massachusetts to Texas and you're going to be in Texas for 2 weeks, it's easy enough to go online and find some information that lets you know about how people speak, about what some of the colloquial sayings are, about certain gestures and ways to communicate that allow you to maximize your communication potential, which usually minimizes the chance of confrontation. The better people communicate, the less conflict there is in general. And particularly going to Malaysia, we're not talking about Massachusetts to Texas, right? We're talking about United States to Malaysia. Like, that's a pretty big jump, But and that's one of those things where do you even think that there would be a resource out there that would be like, oh, hey, if you're an extremely fair-skinned person of Northern European descent, that people are going to want to touch and rub your kid all the time? It probably wouldn't be there. You'd probably take a lot of work to find that.
Yeah, the Lonely Planet Guide for Bangkok calls that out. It says, people are going to touch your kids all the time. They're going to pick them up and show them to other people. Just roll with it. They basically say the Lonely Planet Guide for Bangkok. Although it wasn't mentioned in the Lonely Planet Guide for Malaysia.
Okay, interesting.
It just depends on. My guess is the staff for the Bangkok guide actually have kids. Just little things.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So what I think we're going to go to today to start out is each of us prepared a list of the top 5 things that we wish parents knew more about. And just in case we come off as all snoopy and, hey, we know everything, our next episode is going to be the top 5 things we wish we knew more about. But you and I have both been teaching martial arts and doing security consulting for more than a decade. We found little areas that parents don't know. And one thing that was a teacher of mine from way back used to say all the time that I think is really important in conversations like this is that ignorance is a curable condition, and that ignorance shouldn't have that negative connotation that a lot of people put on it now. It's not an insult. It just means that you haven't had the opportunity to learn something yet.
Sure.
And we all have our blind spots in those places where we not only don't know something, but we don't know that we don't know it. And it's kind of my hope today to go through those top 5 things for each of us and share what information we both have about it. And to bring awareness up. And then anybody who is watching, if you have any questions, or better yet, any further information, we'd love for you to share it in the chat so that we can address it and let the other viewers know about it.
Sounds great.
Why don't we start with your number 5, Richard? What you got?
You want me to read the whole 5, or you just?
Let's go. Your first one. Yeah, your number 5. And we'll talk about it. Then we'll do my number 5, and then we'll go down to our number 1 pet peeves each.
Okay, all right. So my number 5 is your issues are not other people's responsibilities.
Ooh.
Yeah, and this is one that comes from a lot of the reading of Mark McYoung. And for those of you who don't know Mark McYoung, you should know Mark McYoung. And a lot of his work is really gritty, and it's written from a culturally specific perspective. But much of his information has to do with the communication barriers of different subcultures and how it is that when these subcultures rub up against each other, they can create friction, and how much of the effective ability to resolve confrontation before it becomes physical comes down to how well do you communicate and understand subculture. And oftentimes, this is something that I've seen in my travels quite a bit, particularly when you're dealing with parents, because when parents are concerned for their children, they oftentimes become angry and irrational. And if they're angry and irrational and hypervigilant in a situation where they cannot completely communicate what it is that they need in a way that encourages other people to help them, then it makes their job much more difficult as parents.
I want to interject there the term hypervigilant.
Sure.
That's being used, when we use that, that's being used in the more clinical sense where hyper means more than is healthy and useful.
Yes.
Not in just some kind of, hey, I'm really, really vigilant, and that's a good thing. Hypervigilance is a bad thing.
Yeah, tunnel vision
Yes.
would be a better sort of contextual way to phrase it in this particular instance. But oftentimes, you'll see someone encounters a problem, be they a parent, an individual, whatever, and in the midst of trying to solve that problem, oftentimes when they're seeking out an authority figure, a police officer, the owner of an establishment, to help them resolve the problem, which is oftentimes what we do as people traveling abroad. We look for someone who looks like they have a greater capacity to communicate or reach authority, and we go to that person to help enlist their help. Right? I'm going to find my kids. I'm going to go back to the last place that I knew that they were. I'm going to speak to the shop owner. He can help me call the police if I need it. There's this logical progression of how we see these things. Oftentimes when we're communicating, our own issues in terms of our incapacity to communicate or our capacity to immediately become angry and start assigning blame come into play. And when they do, we fail to realize often that the people who are trying to help us are trying to help us.
Yeah.
And so we can actually make it very difficult for police or first responders to do their jobs because we are angry, we're belligerent, or we are incoherent and we can't explain ourselves properly because we're freaking out, we're panicking. And so the whole idea behind your issues are not other people's responsibilities is that if I have an emotionally illogical reaction to something and start freaking out, whether justifiably or injustifiably, that is not someone else's issue to decipher, it's my own. And if people are going to help us, we have to enlist their help in a way that is rational and logical and allows them to help us, as opposed to wasting time, say, trying to find my kids, because I'm arguing and being accusatory towards an EMT or a fire department officer or a police officer or a mall security person or someone who owns the store that I came into to find help with. And so that's my number 5.
You know, that reminds me, that's kind of the flip side of, there's that book that came out about 10, 15 years ago, The 4 Agreements.
Yes.
And one of the 4 agreements is don't take things personally, which is kind of the flip side of it, where if somebody's being rude to you or aggressive to you, so often they're not being rude to you, they're being rude to this guy who angered them 10 minutes ago, and you're just handy. And it's like the flip side of that coin. Now for mine, and this is in some ways almost, you could view this as in opposition to what you had to say, but it's actually for different contexts. My number 5 is it's okay to be an asshole.
Right.
And this isn't towards the people who are trying to help you, but this is towards potential threats. And I think this is especially important for women and moms because we're socially conditioned to be polite and to not make a scene. But if there's somebody who's a potential threat, it's okay to make a scene. It's okay to be rude. I mean, you might embarrass yourself from time to time, but you have 2 choices. If there's a person who looks like they might be a threat, maybe they're getting too much into your personal space. Maybe it seems like they're following you. Maybe they bumped into you once or twice in a way that feels less like crowd jostling and more like a bad touch or an attempt to pick your pocket or something. Or somebody's, loitering around your car and you don't have an option to avoid them. If you're rude and you're wrong, it's embarrassing and you have to apologize.
For sure.
But if you're polite and you're wrong, the potential consequence is much, much worse than being embarrassed. And so giving yourself permission to be assertive, to verbally insist on your rights to personal space and to feel safe.
Sure.
And to have permission to listen to the shoulder angel who's sitting there whispering, dude, something's not right about this. And to listen to your gut reaction and to work with it and to respond in accordance to what you're picking up on. So many of us, because we want life to be easy, we don't want to make a scene, we don't want to be socially inappropriate, we tamp those instincts down.
Absolutely
Nice.
true.
Arr. I love Google Hangouts, man. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. There was a story recently about a mother who was at a school here in, I believe it was Massachusetts or New Hampshire, and one of the women parked in a handicap space, and the other woman who has a handicapped child started videotaping
Mm.
in getting the license plate of the car so that she could ask them to maybe do something about it or keep an eye on it or potentially even maybe ticket them. And the woman who was parking in the handicap space, who does not have a handicapped child, came out, and the woman who was filming didn't approach her, didn't aggress upon her, didn't do anything other than just film her. And at the sight of being filmed, the woman lost her mind and started yelling, started screaming, started aggressing, and the woman who was filming the video then started to ask her, well, my son is handicapped and I need that space, and you parked in it and I couldn't use it, so why are you angry at me for videotaping you? And the logical questioning continued to infuriate the other woman, and it turned into this altercation. In today's society especially, there is this sense of if you point your phone at someone, they might take that as an aggressive action.
Yeah.
And you have to think about, well, geez, if I'm in a public place and somebody's filming me, do I have a right to be angry about that?
Yeah.
And the reality is, no, you don't.
Mm.
And the more angry you are, probably means the bigger law you broke. You know, that is that case. But if you choose to point your phone at somebody or photograph someone or videotape them, you have to understand that that's probably going to cause a reaction. Even if you're completely in the moral right or in the legal right to film a situation, it may, whether that person is just an unbalanced person or just a parent who's had a bad day or a corrupt police officer who might subject you to harm because he doesn't want himself to be videotaped, that may cause a response. And
that
you're going to
is
have
the
to deal with
corollary.
that response.
Yeah.
If the person decides to pull out a weapon and kill you because you did it, are you prepared to defend yourself against that? Would it have been much better to just drive away and brush it off?
Yes.
And you don't know until you're in that moment. But that speaks, to, I guess, to the center of both your point and mine. There are times when you have to be an asshole, and there are times when being an asshole can get you killed.
Exactly.
And what are you prepared to do on either end of that? What do you need to do on either end of that?
Yeah, that is the other side of it's okay to be an asshole. That when you step up and be an asshole, if that person meant you harm, it's probably coming. And you need to be aware of that. And we'll actually get to the follow-up to that is my number 3. And so we'll kind of leave folks in suspense about that. All right, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is the fine art of refusal.
Mm.
Is how to say no in a way that doesn't escalate a situation.
Nice.
And far too often, I mean, we all have a hard time saying no. Particularly, many of us who we want to help people, or we've had traumatic experiences in our lives, and we see other people having similar experiences, and we go, you know what, I want to help you. Oftentimes, it's easy to be taken advantage of, or to be led into a bad situation by a predator, whether they be a resource predator or a process predator, someone who wants to take our property or do us harm, or even who just wants to emotionally manipulate us or sexually take advantage of us. It's okay to say no, and we have to connect to our capacity to say no, and say no in many different ways, in many different contexts, in subtly, physically, verbally, draw a line, but at the also be obscure, be capable of giving the person an out, so that when you say no, it doesn't cause an affront to them or make them have to lose face. Always, to go back to Sun Tzu, always give your opponent an out. Always give a way that you can say no in a way that saves them face and doesn't force them to engage you at a higher level in order to counter your no. So the fine art of refusal, like, no means no, except when it kind of doesn't, or you're just playing a cultural verbal game that everyone plays in order to really sanctify the no. There's this whole thing in Minnesota. My wife's Minnesotan, and there's this whole thing in Minnesota where you have to. There's 3 no's. So they say, do you want to? And no, okay. And then a little bit while later, but no, do you want to? And now it's not just do you want to. Now the plate is in front of you, being put in front of you, and you have to say no. And then it's taken away, and then it's everything else is away, but the plate is still there. And it's like now it's really being like but won't you? And it's no, and they don't expect you to necessarily, and they don't see it as infringing upon your space. At all. It's just the custom that you have to say no 3 times.
Okay, interesting.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But you may end up in a situation traveling abroad where you say no, and after the second no or the third no, you're starting to get freaked out, and you're starting to go, do I need to escalate into a retreat from the situation, or something more serious, because clearly no isn't understood. That's not that no isn't understood. It's that you have to say no 3 times, and that's the custom.
Very, very true. Now, on the other side, I'm going to switch around a little bit. The sun is rising here, so I need to get out. There we go.
It's about 7:30 there in the morning?
Yeah, okay. Literally on the other side of the world from you.
Yeah, it's 7:30 here in the evening in New Hampshire, so it's completely dark outside right now, and it's probably, we had a warm day today. It was like probably 55.
Oh,
but
wow.
It's been in the mid-30s for a long time, and we had a particularly nasty winter, and it's been below 0 with the wind chill for considerable period of time. So
I'm so glad I'm here, man. It's high 70s, low 80s, light breeze every day. I'm actually a little disoriented because I realize it's April, but it's been like this since I got here in September. It feels like a year hasn't passed.
That's amazing.
But to your saying no point, my wife and I were in Beijing before we had kids, and we noticed that there was something that would happen. If we were white people walking through any kind of public area, somebody would come up to us and start a conversation about how they were students and wanted to practice their English with us and ask us a few very innocuous questions.
Sure.
It would always end up, within a couple of minutes, they'd say, hey, there's this bazaar with very good deals. There's this art exhibit. There's this other thing a tourist might like. Over here, off the beaten path, let me lead you there. Now, I have no idea if there's going to be a violent mugging going on there, or what was most likely would be some shop that had stuff marked up at 300%, 400% of what you'd pay elsewhere, and this is just a scam. But it was clearly a scam and clearly some kind of predator thing going on. Sure. And we practiced various no's. And ultimately, the one that we found worked was, during the conversation to set us at ease, the question would always come up, so what do you do for a living in America? And by day 2, our answer was, well, she's on leave from the U.S. Army, and I'm a professional bodyguard working for Gavin de Becker. Now, my wife has never been in the Army, and I've never worked for Gavin de Becker, but the next thing they always said was, enjoy Beijing. And that was the no that worked in that situation for us. It allowed them to save face because we weren't being aggressive, we weren't being rude. But it made it very clear that we were not the marks they were looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great strategy.
And you just got to find the ones. You got to find the thing for that culture. And cross-culturally, as you say, no means very different things in very different cultures and in different situations.
Sure, absolutely. That's a great example. I think that's very useful. The flip side of that. Yeah. Is that's a form of posture. Mm-hmm. So if we think about the responses, I wrote an article about this on my blog, Fight or Flight, the False Dichotomy, and I go through a number of the different layers of the response process, but the other side of that is that's a form of posture. And posture can be effective, but it can be dangerous too. Yes. And for the level of person that you're dealing with there, you're traveling with your family, and you're being basically pickpockets and
Yeah.
petty criminals who are just trying to run a scam. It's not going to be a problem. They don't even know who Gavin DeBecker is, but when you confidently say something like that to them, they don't even need to know. They just say, you know what, that's not the mark we're looking for.
Yeah.
If you try that and you
Mhm.
go too far, you say
Yeah.
that you're associated with the wrong person,
Yeah.
or you meet a group of people who they almost see that as a challenge
Yeah.
of like, oh yeah, then you
Yeah.
can create problems for yourself.
You need to be very
It's
careful with that. True.
Yeah, you need to be very careful using that, and I think that that's abroad you have
Mhm.
a lot of leeway with it.
Yeah.
In terms
Mhm.
of interstate travel in the United States, you need to be careful. There was
Yeah.
an example once. You know who Pat Miletich is?
Oh yeah.
Pat Miletich has a story in his autobiography where he was a legend. He came from the Midwest, and he was just known for all the states around where he came
Yeah.
from as the ass kicking guy. And one night he got into a verbal altercation with somebody. And the guy said, "Yeah, do you know who I am?" And he goes, "Yeah, who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Pat Miletich." "You're going to mess with me? I'm Pat Miletich." And Pat Miletich was like, "Really?" And he reached into his wallet and he took out his driver's license and he handed the guy his driver's license. And the guy like went white as a sheet and was like, "Oh my God, oh, please don't kill me." But it's in his book. It's a wonderful
I will
story the
have
way
to
he
check that
tells
out.
it. But just that's the extreme
Yeah.
example of if you
Mhm.
try to posture, say you're
Yeah.
associated with somebody or something that you're not, you better be
Yeah.
prepared to have your bluff called. And Pat was nice in that instance and said, "No, dude, I'm not gonna beat you up, like, but just don't go around saying that you're me anymore." And that,
Mhm.
but yes, but another side of that you have to be
Yeah.
careful.
And, the other piece of that I think is important was body language and tone, where
Yes.
what I didn't say was, don't mess with me, I'm a bodyguard, rah, rah, rah. It was a goofy conversation. Well, this is what I do for a living. What do you do for a living? Or
Mm.
back in my days when I would be drinking in places that people would sometimes start fights with you, I would never be, hey man, you don't want to mess with me. I know the owner, I know the cops. But if I saw somebody who was looking aggressive, maybe at me, I would go real quick, put my hand on the shoulder of the bouncer who I knew because I only drank in places where I was a regular, and have a couple words with them and then sit down, not making eye contact. But that kind of posturing without being aggressive is extremely useful because it gives the information without presenting a challenge.
Yes. Yep.
So that was your number 4, I think, right? Where we were going with that, knowing how to
Yes.
say
Yeah, that was
no.
my number 4. Yep.
My number 4 is real simple. It's 3 skills: know how to swim, know how to fall, and know how to survive a fire.
I love those.
And
I
they're
love those.
just, I grew up in Oregon where for a very long time you could not graduate from college without proving you knew how to swim.
Mm.
And
Yep.
swimming lessons were part of the primary school curriculum statewide. And those have changed, but that was the thing. And knowing how to swim, drowning is the top cause of accidental death for children under 4 after
Yep.
motor vehicle accidents.
Yes.
And falling in fires, the stats are a little harder to analyze because, you know how to swim, your chances of drowning just collapse. Where if you know how to fall without being hurt, there's a lot of falls that won't affect. And
Yeah.
knowing how to survive a fire, there aren't a lot of really good stats about who died in a fire, knowing how and who not. But
Right.
these are 3 things that are high-level causes of death for children especially, that literally taking a class and learning how and practicing a little bit can just cut down the risk substantially.
Mm-hmm.
And although, we're both in the martial arts field, we either teach martial arts professionally or care a lot about people who do. But if you came to me as a parent and said, what should I do to keep my kids safe? I would say swimming lessons before I would say karate lessons.
Yep.
Every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually had several instances where people brought young children to me, and I don't really teach young children. The material that I do is mature material, and I have a few junior students, but I don't primarily teach children. And I've had parents come to me and say, I want my 2-year-old to learn martial arts, and I'm like, well, what about fire safety? What about swimming lessons? What
Yeah,
about gymnastics?
yeah,
What about, all of these other things? No, but I want him to be safe. I want him to be able to defend himself. I want to be able him to get the confidence of knowing that he can protect himself. And I said, at 2 and 3 and 4 years old, your child needs to learn how to swim, how to fall, how to jump, and how to healthily associate with girls and women, far more than he needs to know how to kick or punch or roll or choke or do a form or stand in a horse stance or anything like that. And I in all of those instances kind of got a quizzical look. And, just kind of this like, well, wait a minute, are you saying that you won't take my child as a student, or that you don't think that, like, it was kind of confusing. And in those instances I've developed kind of a stock speech that I have to explain to people what I mean when I say that. But it's absolutely true. And if it hadn't been on, when I looked at your list, when you first sent me your list, I was like, oh, he took my number one. Like, he took the first thing, And I think it's absolutely true. If you have the capacity to just do those things, not only does it just make you safer in terms of you've added a skill set that is life-saving, but the confidence that has been developed by the teaching, the coaching, and the skill attainment feeds over into so many other levels of your life, and I absolutely agree with you.
Absolutely. And I have to share a story. My youngest learned to swim while we were here. There's a pool here in our apartment complex, and we're down there every day because it's freaking hot. And he moved from only able to wade and a little bit afraid of deep water to he can jump into any part of the pool and swim across it. He can do 100 yards, no problem. Mostly accidentally, just by watching us swim. And to your point about that confidence, he actually didn't want to learn to read because it was hard for him. And the conversation we had about, well, you didn't know how to swim when you got here, did you? Well, no, but every day you practice a little bit, and now you know how to swim, right? Well, it'll be just that way with reading. And damned if it didn't work.
Right.
So you're dead on about that skill, the confidence you get from learning a skill. Yes. Now, the other thing that I definitely want to say here is, there are a couple of programs here about teaching very young children and toddlers to swim. And they appear to be fairly successful. You see the videos, it's really amazing, where, a 2-year-old falls in the pool and is able to get to side. The data on that and on swimming lessons for toddlers is that it actually slightly increases the chance of drowning. Because the parents have a false sense of confidence and aren't paying attention to their kid when they're in the water.
Yes.
So get your kid swimming lessons, but that doesn't let us off the hook.
Yes. Yes.
And that's just a really important corollary to put on there, too.
That's a really good point. There's an analog to that in motorcycle riding statistics, because I ride a motorcycle, that first year is actually like your safest year. And then second year is pretty safe. And then third year is actually the least lethal year. And then fourth year onward, it gets like progressively worse. There's ups and downs, but your fourth, fifth year as a motorcycle rider, it's your most dangerous year because you've gained enough confidence to kind of zone out at certain points or to take unnecessary risks that you think you can handle. You're hyper vigilant and super just concentrated on everything your first couple years. And I think that there's an absolute corollary to that. You get too comfortable not supervising your kids because they know how to swim. But they're still only 2, 3, 4, 5 years old.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's a great point.
It's an important one, I think. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is how to drive safely and with sense.
You stole mine. It's huge.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, you just think about the horrible things that happen And I drive a lot, and I'm from New England, and Massachusetts drivers consistently, in all of the organizations that collect the data, are like the worst drivers in the country every year. It's amazing. It's like the National Institute for Highway Safety, like all of the insurance institutes and everything. It's, Massachusetts is not a very good state for driving. And I, as a stupid teenager, did a lot of dumb things that I escaped from just pure luck, and not just on the road, but particularly on the road. But not even in terms of how horrific auto accidents are and what they can do to our children, but just the anger and the resentment and the negative energy and the stress and the physical negativity that each and every one of us allows to seep into our daily lives because of what happens on the roads. Is huge. And every state has its own laws. Every state has its own traffic patterns and its own particular ways that people get in and out. Oftentimes when we're driving, we don't realize, we look in our rearview mirror and we don't realize that what we're doing has a huge impact on what is happening 2 miles behind us, or that what is right in front of us right now was created by something that was there 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago, or that is 3 or 4 miles in front of us and that we have absolutely no control over. Fails to escape us in the moment because we are so emotionally invested in the of right now and what I need, right, that we forget that as we're driving by and we're going, well, there's nothing here, and why the hell am I sitting here in traffic because there's nothing here, and we're changing lanes into somebody else without looking, or we're accelerating wildly, or following too close, tailgating, or being aggressive to other people. We're not even thinking about, well, the reason why you're waiting and you've been stuck for an hour is somebody died here 30 minutes ago, 40 minutes ago. And that's why you're stuck there, and probably because they were driving like you're driving right now. So that's a big thing for me,
And on that topic, put down your damn cell phone.
I
have a dear friend who is an insurance adjuster, and we were talking one night. It never occurred to me that part of his job is to go look at cars and assess the damage, which means looking at cars that have been in fatal accidents. And the stats are that texting while driving specifically now causes more traffic fatalities than drunk driving.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I don't remember the exact number, but like a 2-digit margin at this point.
I wouldn't be surprised at all.
I
mean,
and so that's
of the nature of those two things. And it's I could see very, very easily how texting or using a cell phone while driving is much more dangerous.
So, but that's a huge one. I think that's my "you stole mine" one for the list, because that's so hugely important. And of course, the stats bear it out. Motor vehicle accidents are the #1 cause of death for any kid, and even young adults, up until you get to an age bracket where it's the lifestyle preventable diseases that start to get you. Motor vehicles are the #1.
Yes. Yeah.
So my number 3 is, and this kind of pings back to my number 5, is that retreat and avoidance are your best defense.
Defensive driving skills, anyone?
Defensive driving, paying attention, and that's okay. To what you said about it's okay to be an asshole. Yes, it is, and often it's not a good idea to be an asshole. That if there's a situation where you're starting to feel threatened, where there's a part of you that thinks that, hey man, back the hell off, is the right response. Is the right response actually just moving 30 yards to the left? Right? There's a spiel that I give when I do teenager self-defense about I'm with my mom, we're coming out of the mall, and it's late at night, and I look over to our car, and there's 3 young men in hoodies just kind of lounging around it. I'm a martial artist. I've been doing martial arts for 30 years. What do I do? And I have the teenagers all raise their hand, and of course they all respond with variations on the theme of, well, you go lay down the smack. And after I've had enough of those answers, I say, no, I go back inside and I get the security guard. Because why would I walk into that danger? I got kids to go home to. I've got a family to take care of. I've got a living to earn so that my family can have the things they need. Why would I risk any of that because I was too macho to turn around and go inside?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, where it's okay to be an asshole, as I think is the hardest thing for women because they're socially conditioned to not cause a scene and to behave themselves.
Yeah.
Retreat and avoidance, I think, is the hardest thing for men because we're socially conditioned by portrayals of what it is to be a man in the movies and by just kind of the assumptions of our culture that you don't back down from a fight.
Yeah.
Why the hell not back down from a fight? Fights are unpleasant.
They're very unpleasant. There's a wonderful Japanese parable about a grandmaster of a system, martial arts system, who is looking for a successor to his system, and everybody thinks it's the head guy, and who is just the most physically talented of all of the students. And yet there are some other students, in particular one who is who doesn't have nearly the physical capacity, but he's known as the nerdy, smarter of the two students. So one day, walking into town, the head student, there's an oxen who's kicking and bucking and just being belligerent, and the head student, he walks sort of very, very close to it, and as it kicks and bucks, he dodges one hoof and then dodges the other, and then slips off to the side and just continues on, and everybody goes, "Ooh, that was." Oh, what physical grace! What an amazing feat of just timing and reflexes! And of course, he's going to be the successor to the system. The next day, the other student comes along and he sees the oxen kicking and stuck and belligerent. And 30 yards before he gets to it, he walks off of the road. He walks sort of into the bushes. He comes around the other side, and then approaches the guy and asks him if he can help get his oxen and his cart off the road, and from there helps them pull it back on and come into the village. And the obviously the moral of the story is then that student becomes the head of the system, and the teacher says, well, what a reckless, careless decision to just enter into a dangerous situation to see if you can show off in front of people, as opposed to being safe and smart and then helping someone. So there's a wonderful Japanese parable that brings up when you say that, that I think speaks directly to that point.
And there's a point from Strong on Defense by Sanford Strong.
Oh yeah, great book.
Great go-to book, although some of the fun things about that, because the book's so out of date, it was written in the late 80s.
Yeah, it's very dated.
He's got a whole chapter on, man, cell phones are going to change the game. Right?
It's like, we're there, brother.
Yeah. But one of the points he makes is that if you're a parent and you come home and there's a bad guy harming your child, what you should do is leave and get the cops. And that's a really hard reality for parents to look at. And even in the book, the next thing he says in the book is, I have never been able to convince a parent to do this.
Yeah.
So here's what I suggest you do if you can't make yourself do that.
Sure.
But you summon help.
Yes. And then if you need to go back in, you do so after you've summoned help.
Exactly. I think most parents would have to just psychologically go back in.
Yes.
But make sure that help is coming in case you fail.
Yeah. There's a wonderful, Rory Miller talks about the protocol that's been put in place since the Columbine massacres, whereby there was a period where during school shootings in this country where officers would just respond, and they would immediately go into the school and they would start to try to apprehend the shooter. The problem is that the shooter is prepared, the shooter knows the environment, and inevitably what was happening was the officers were being ambushed and killed, and then the shooters were free to just keep killing. Mm-hmm. And so the protocol that was put in place was that the first officers on the scene were to set up a perimeter and wait for backup to arrive until the specialized teams could go in, and there were reinforcements and tactical logistical support available, and that was oftentimes incredibly psychologically and emotionally difficult for the officers who are responding, because they have to stand there and not go in and listen to the shooters continue to kill. And there have been statistical analyses that have been done that show that this is a much better way to do it. But the psychological impact to those officers is massive.
Yeah.
And this was something we talked about with Rory when he was here. But yeah, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
The press comes after them, unfortunately, too, I've noticed, because they don't understand that policy.
Yeah.
I've noticed that's been an issue with some of the coverage of events like that afterwards.
Yeah.
But that's just another example of retreat and avoidance and summoning help are the best ways to keep yourself safe, are the best ways to keep your family safe.
Yes.
So much of that is your ego. I mentioned shoulder angels earlier. You also have your shoulder devil about, I'm the protector, I'm the dad, I should go whip this guy's butt. I can't take that. Yeah, you totally can.
Right.
And to your point, your issues aren't his problem.
Yes.
Right?
Right, yeah.
And your issues aren't your kid's problem. That I don't feel like a man if I walk away from that dangerous situation. You're really going to risk your kids or your presence in your kid's life over that?
Yeah. You're going to force them to untangle that issue in the light of your injury or your death or whatever it might be. That's crazy.
Yeah. Thank you, no thank you.
Yeah, right. The old way George Carlin used to put it, he said, if somebody walks up to you and tries to hand you a pile of shit, you don't have to take it.
Yes, exactly.
You just say, no thank you. I don't want the pile of shit. I appreciate it. No thank you.
So what's your number two?
My number two is know enough about local laws or customs or how to find out to end up not getting yourself in trouble. And I think that particularly for parents, once again, because we're so much thinking about the itinerary and where we're going to go and what we're going to do and how we're going to manage the kids, and when Johnny needs his antibiotics and Susie needs her special lunch and all of these other things, where we're going to get gas and how much is this going to cost and all of that, that we forget that we're going to another country or another state, and if conflict arises, we tend to be overreactive a lot of the time, irrational, like I was saying before. And if we're not reasonably informed about what the norm is for where we are, we can very easily overextend or step over those boundaries, and we're the asshole. We're the person who's behaving away from the norm of what everybody else is doing, but we don't realize it. And so we expect when we're in Texas for everybody to behave like when we're in, Toronto. And it's no, and I think of it in terms of accents, because everybody thinks of everyone else having an accent, but they never really realize that they have an accent too. And so you go, well, all these people here have Southern accents. No, you have the Yankee accent to them, right? So while you're meanwhile being caught up with how everybody else is behaving, you don't have the self-awareness to realize that you're the one who's out of place here. And you're the one who doesn't know the custom. You're the one who doesn't know the law. You're the one who doesn't know how everybody's supposed to operate in this situation. Sit down and shut up and pay attention. And stop acting like you're in Kansas, because you're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah, that calls back to the conversation we were having earlier in the cast about people touching my child all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, his behavior here, where in America I would be justified putting hands on.
Right.
Right. Where if somebody at the supermarket came up and grabbed my child and picked him up in the supermarket, I probably wouldn't injure that person, but I would probably have my hands on that person in an aggressive manner.
Sure.
But that would be totally inappropriate for me to do here, because that's the appropriate behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a joke that my brother and I have bounced this idea around, mostly as a joke, but there's a possibility we'll do it someday, about the world needs a resource about police bribery, which is exactly to the point you're making, where in certain parts of Mexico, not bribing an officer who pulls you over can get you beaten and jailed.
Yes.
But in parts of America, attempting to bribe an officer in the exact same circumstance
will get you beaten in jail.
Will get you beaten in jail.
Right, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, out here in
Yeah.
Malaysia, there's a little bit of police corruption, and apparently, if you are a Westerner, you're just shielded from it. But
Okay.
traffic tickets are often handled by just a cash payment to the cop.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's just how it is. And you're not likely to get beaten or jailed if you don't do it, because you'll
Mm-hmm.
just get your ticket, right?
Yeah.
But that's another example of the rules are different in different places, and it's important to know them going in.
Yeah. That's and I mean, this really goes to my number one as well. Um, but this issue of there are very specific laws and customs and ways that things are done, and if you're going into someone else's environment, then you need to be aware and you need to pay attention, or you need to research beforehand and you need to find out, hey, if I get pulled over in these towns or these municipalities in this particular place, and the police officer says these particular words or this phrase, then that means I'm supposed to pay him money
Yeah.
as opposed to accept the ticket. And that's just something that you should learn. You should do the due diligence in order to find out before you travel to a place where that might be an instance. A lot of time, the U.S. Department of State has good information on their website about how likely it is that is to happen. Although, so you can go, you know what, I might need to bribe some people if I travel to this part of the world, and they see me as a Westerner and I'm moving around and I'm doing something. But there aren't a lot of resources to then go, okay, well, what are those catchwords? What are those key phrases? What are those dog whistles that the people are going to say that are going to alert me to danger, or tell me that I need to bribe somebody, or let me know that it's time to leave, or any of these things? There aren't a lot of resources for that. A lot of that's kind of, you think you've got to dig deep into the internet fora to find the people who have been there and done that and have been like, oh, you're going here, watch out for this.
Yeah. Yeah, the local scam and the local behaviors. Those are just very important to know. And as you say, whether you're traveling internationally or going 2 states over, or even from the neighborhood you're familiar with to another neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah, you think about New York City or Chicago, right? You cross over a very fine line when you go between neighborhoods, and suddenly it's like, oh, you know what? I'm brushing up against something that I don't need to be brushing up against, or I need to know how to communicate in this environment in a respectful way.
Exactly. So my number 2 is knowing what's not likely.
I love this, and I can't wait to hear you explain it, but I really love the way that it's phrased.
Yeah. Well, you look at what people spend money on for the safety of their kids, right? Karate lessons, fancy burglar alarms, CO2 detectors, guns,
yep.
Right?
I got all of them.
Yeah. Right? And these are all, and they make us feel safe. But you know what? Until you're 45, it's accidents and suicides that are going to get you. After 45, it's diseases that diet and lifestyle affect. Understanding the things that are actually likely to harm. Motor vehicle accidents, to your point. Drowning, falling, to my point from earlier. Those are the things that are likely to kill you. Diet and nutrition. If you make it to adulthood, it's your diet and your nutrition, not a mugger, not a school shooting, that's going to get you. A very specific example of this is that parents are, we all have that nightmare of this stranger abduction. And if that happens, it is probably the worst possible thing that could happen to a family. I'm not even sure how I would come back whole from that happening, especially if I were the parent on duty when my child was taken.
Sure.
It's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. But if you compare stranger victimization to being victimized by people you know and your child knows, the number of times a stranger hurts a child is smaller than the margin for error for the sample size.
Sure.
Statistically, it doesn't actually happen. And yet we spend all this time and energy on going to the local karate school and getting a seminar on how to not be abducted by a stranger. We got these stranger danger campaigns, which turned out to be very, very, counterproductive and actually make children less safe. Yeah. All these things focused on that, but so little on trust your parents to tell them if something's hinky. On vetting, caregivers, coaches, parents that your child wants to spend the night with. Thank you for the comic relief on this, because this is a scary, yucky topic. All right, but it is. and as parents, we don't like to think about it or talk about it, but when looking at victimizing of children, we've spent all this energy individually and as a society on preparing and protecting from stranger abduction, and our eyes on the wrong ball.
That's true.
And as a parent, I think it's our responsibility to understand what are the most likely threats and spend more energy on those than on the more terrifying but very, very, very unlikely situations. It's the same kind of thing about people are afraid of shark attacks, but they'll drive recklessly on the way to the beach kind of situation.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Or they'll drive rather than fly.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And once again, that actually speaks to, I'm going to bring up Mark McYoung again, because what he's really done a lot of his work is he's talked about these borderland areas between cultures and subcultures.
Yeah.
Where communication skills become so important, where the likelihoods and unlikelihoods, they swap places.
Yeah.
And suddenly the response that was on paper the correct response actually incites exactly the opposite.
Yes.
All of these places, and so when you talk about sort of the likelihoods and what is not just what is likely, but what is unlikely, I always I imagine Mark in the back of my mind and a lot of the stuff that he said. But it goes to what Gavin DeBecker said in The Gift of Fear.
Yeah.
When you feel fear, question it and ask why, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, don't artificially manufacture fear.
Yes.
Because then it's the crying of wolf, and what it does is it denudes the true response of its power to actually wake you up and call you to attention when there is true danger.
Yeah. And
so having what's that? I'm sorry.
It saps resources, whether those are your financial resources, your temporal resources, or just your energy and attention.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, don't artificially manufacture that fear. Pay attention to what is not really going to happen. Also, because we can worry ourselves to death over shit that is never going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and another point that Gavin DeBecker makes in Gift of Fear is the difference between anxiety and fear. That if you're anxious about something, that's prima facie evidence that it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
We don't worry about stuff that's happening to us. We respond to stuff that's happening to us.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
So, drum roll. What's your number one?
All right, and this feeds into my number two. My number one is how to speak properly to police and first responders.
Nice.
It's, when we find ourselves in trouble, whether or not it's been a quote-unquote self-defense, it's been a physical altercation with somebody else or any of these things, you're probably going to have to speak to some peace officer or EMT or paramedic or fire department officer, some sort of first responder or police officer. And far too often, far too many of us do not understand when to be quiet and not say anything, when to explain ourselves or to answer questions, and when we do, how to appropriately do it so that we're actually getting the help that we need.
Yes.
As opposed to making this person think that we're dicks and not want to help us at all.
Yeah.
Even if it's something as simple as there's a little fender bender, there's a civil suit involving the fender bender, there were some words that were spoken, some anger that cropped up during the accident. When that officer shows up on the scene and he writes his report, or he speaks to both of you, he is going to write that report. He is going to go into court to testify, whether there's criminal or just a civil matter, however it may be, in the way that he sees favorable to the person that he likes the best. Yes. Not always the person who is in the right in the situation. And so always, not always, right? But even if it is, everything is completely goes perfectly, and everything is honest and straightforward, and the police officer is a paragon of virtue. We still have to be able to articulate ourselves to the officer in a way that communicates effectively our true intent and makes the officer want to help us and facilitate our ability to get home safely, to get accomplished what it is that we need to get accomplished. And I watched thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of video. I have seen personally thousands and thousands of hours of court cases adjudicated. I have seen thousands of hours of personal examples of me or people whom I was with in the moment interacting with police officers. And it constantly amazes me, particularly for people who have not really had to communicate with police officers very often. Oftentimes people who, they're not criminals, they're not hardened people, they rarely get traffic tickets, but if a situation arises and they have to speak to a police officer, they get defensive, they get angry, they don't articulate their point properly, they get demanding, they expect certain things, and when a police officer has to deal with a situation where he's getting not just your bullshit and all of your problems that aren't his responsibility, right? Going back to your issues aren't his problem. He's got to get it from the other person as well, and he has to listen to 5 or 6 other people tell their version of it. Oftentimes, none of them corroborate or make sense. And he's got 6 different versions of what went on. And meanwhile, if you're an asshole to him, then you lose another 2 or 3 hours before they actually start looking for your child.
Yes.
Or you lose a night in jail because he just throws you in with everybody else because he doesn't know what the hell happened, you know? So knowing how, because you think about if your child gets lost, if your child gets abducted, if you get assaulted, if your property gets stolen, if you're in a hotel and you're suddenly missing your passport, if you are abused by someone or you're approached, who are you going to go to get help? You're probably going to go to the police in some capacity or some sort of first responder. And depending upon the country that you're in or the state that you're in or the culture that you're in and where you come from, they may be inclined to help you, they may be not. You may need to pay them some money, you may not. You may find yourself in a situation where they're very willing to help you if you just know how to speak to them properly.
Yeah.
Or they can throw you in jail and not start looking for your kid for another 2 days if you speak to them in the wrong way. And there aren't any classes on how to properly speak or articulate yourself to a peace officer in order to get him to do what you need him to do.
No, and there really should be. You know, the best advice I got for dealing with law enforcement was, I don't even remember who it was that wrote this down in a book somewhere, but just remember at all times that every second of a police officer's workday, he is asking himself the question, is this person about to try to kill me?
Sure.
Everything you can do with your body language, with your positioning, with your tone of voice, to make it clear that you're not going to try to kill them, is immensely appreciated.
Yeah.
You know, when I was stupider and younger, I dealt with police officers more often than I'm proud of. But one of my rules was sitting down or leaning in a way so that I would have to make one large move before standing up, because cops notice that.
Yes.
And shut up until the other guy is done running his mouth. And that works for fender benders too, or a police officer's on the scene. If the other person is agitated and screaming and you're just very calm, yes, officer, no, officer, well, this is what happened, would you like me here, officer, or would you like me over there, officer? It puts them at ease.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that's something that I think that we as civilians, we often we don't appreciate. And when a police officer shows up on the scene, you know, he's oftentimes had a very, very long day ahead of him.
Yes.
Or behind him. And our problem, which is massive to us in that moment, unless it really is an extremely serious situation prima facie,
Yeah.
is oftentimes just a little tiny bump in the road that doesn't mean a lot to him. And
Yeah.
he's looking at the situation and going, you know what, just deal with it with your insurance. Why do you need me here to take his statement and go to court? There are much better things that I can be doing with your tax dollars in my time.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, we got to harass the guy because he didn't see it exactly our way,
Mhm.
or we don't even know how to speak the language and
Yeah.
communicate that something's wrong.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, it's so really learning that, and this kind of goes to just a soapbox of mine that we live in a civilization, and we've specialized certain duties to different groups in our civilization. Doesn't matter what country you're in. There's a hierarchy of what people do and how we maintain these groups. And it constantly amazes me how little responsibility we take for understanding how other people's jobs within this civilization work
Mhm.
until we absolutely need them to do something right now. And then we go, oh, gee, like I probably should have known how to do that. And it's one of the reasons why we're here and why we're talking about
Yeah.
this. But you can't get help if you don't know how to properly ask for it. This is a big thing in Buddhism and in Zen in particular is that if you don't even know how to ask the question,
Mhm.
then how can you expect to find the answer? And
Yeah.
oftentimes we find ourselves in situations, culturally different situations, dangerous situations, situations where we've lost our cool, situations where we don't have access to our higher thinking capacity, situations where we're totally disoriented and
Mhm.
acting irrationally, and we don't even have the faintest idea about what question to ask or how to ask it or to whom we should ask it. And
Yeah.
it really, I think, speaks to our job, and I guess what we're doing professionally, to say, hey, if you're going to go somewhere, if you're going to do something, if you're going to be a human being on this planet of 8 billion people pretty soon, then you need to know a few things about how society works, how the world works, how you work, and paying attention to your own behavior and how it affects other people. And it'll save you a lot of heartache, it'll save you a lot of grief, and it'll make all of our lives safer.
Yeah, I like how your number one in some ways is a culmination of many of the other points on your list, where dealing with first responders and law enforcement is about understanding how their culture is different from yours, is about applying that your issues aren't their problem.
Mm,
Those other 2 points feed into this number one of how to deal with the people who can help you in the way that makes them most likely to help you.
yeah.
Yeah. And my number one is very much the same, where my number one is the importance of awareness and being aware of your environment, being aware of the risks, being aware of your habits is really the upshot of almost everything else on my list.
Hmm.
But there's a crime novel that I read one time where somebody was explaining why he didn't feel bad that somebody else died. And the guy said, well, he died from not paying attention. In this life, everybody dies of that.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And really, it's not just, the underworld or the macho world of crime novels. It's most people die from not paying attention. Whether that's losing focus at the wrong time while you're driving, whether that's not paying attention to the social cues in a situation that could be violent, whether that's eating Big Macs instead of salads one too many times. And as a parent, paying attention not just to the hazards that are out there, but to your point about the vibe when you're driving. How does the way you interact with your kids, how does the fact that you couldn't say no to your boss and now you've got 10 extra hours of work every week, how does that affect your ability to parent?
Mm.
Is your attention, your understanding of the culture you're about to take your kids on a 2-week trip to good enough that you can focus on having a wonderful adventure with your family instead of stressing the logistics and just paying attention to everything around you? And that's a tall order, especially when you got kids, because kids could demand so much of your attention and so much of your energy. But to me, paying attention and having skills about observing the situation, skills about maintaining the right mindset, skills about reducing stress can keep your family safe better than basically any other investment of time and energy that I can think of. And that's why it's my number one.
It's wonderfully phrased, and it's another one of those things where if you hadn't put it down as your first one, I would have put it down as mine. There's a story. One of my teachers, John Dido Laurie, who passed away several years ago. He was a Zen teacher. He was the abbot of a Buddhist monastery. He died of lung cancer, and he had been a long-time smoker during the 60s. He was part of that 60s Beat Generation, Zen sort of practitioners, you know, and he was sitting with one of his Dharma heirs one night, and they were talking, and he said, it's not the lung cancer that kills you. And his student said, well, what is it then? And he said, it's the unattended karma. And that goes to your point of, you know, it's the things we're not paying attention to. That all of us die of that sooner or later, or go through that process. You know, it's the things that we're not paying attention to. It's the unattended karma. And far too often when we think of awareness, whenever I talk about awareness or we do awareness drills, I put three people through kind of an awareness gauntlet in our training programs when we do our sessions. Far too often when people come in, their awareness is outwardly directed exclusively. They're looking at awareness of their environment, awareness of what other people are doing, awareness of their, you know, physical surroundings, awareness of, you know, who's with them, of all of these things, and those are important and necessary. But they don't have the self-awareness of looking at their own behavior and saying, what do I do with me that affects that?
Yeah.
I think on the road is a wonderful place where that gets sort of carried out, you know, and you go, well, that guy was tailgating me and throwing me the finger, or doing this and doing that, and la la la, and it was like, well, why was he doing that? Was he doing that because you cut him off? Was he doing that because you just let him? You know, because he needed somebody to take it out on, and you decided that you were going to be right there at the time that he was going to do it, because you weren't going to give up 10 feet of your space.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody else in Texas has a Southern accent. I don't have a Yankee accent, right?
Yeah.
It's not, and that awareness extends both sides. I think we've kind of had this theme of looking at both sides of the issue, and far too often we see the awareness thing as only being aware of what other people do and how it affects us, and not being aware of what we do and how it affects other people. And making a point of, when we're traveling, when we're with our kids, when we're practicing, when we're setting an example, when we're just moving from our house to our job or whatever, of controlling our own behavior, our own emotions, our own anger, our own responses, so that we don't end up in situations in the first place.
Yes.
I think that's overlooked far too often.
You know, one of the smartest people teaching martial arts today is a man named John Riddle out of Florida. And one of the drills that he teaches for awareness of your own self is go to the mall, sit down, and pretend you're a mugger and choose a victim. And just watching people's body language, watching their awareness. Who could you steal from with no risk of getting caught? Or if you want to up the ante as a parent, whose kid could you take?
Yeah.
And just watch who seems like the most likely victim, and then see if you do any of those things, and if you do, knock it off.
Yeah.
That's one of the best drills I've ever seen, and that, again, I'm stealing directly from John Riddle.
One of the ones that I do is we go to the mall, and I basically just have them walk from one end of the mall to the other. But the rule is that you have to walk on the correct side, and in accordance with all of the rules of how you should walk. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because if people are walking on the wrong side, people are bumping into you, people are going backwards, not looking where they're going, and pretty soon you have to leave your lane, you have to leave your side, you have to, and you go, well, gee, I can't just do that. Then you have them walk back, and you go, hey, you know what? You just move fluidly throughout the group, and
Yeah.
you bring their realization that you go, wow, like I have to move my body as somebody who's aware of what I'm doing
Mhm.
constantly to compensate and account for large groups of people who are totally and blissfully unaware
Yeah.
of where their bodies are in space and how the movement of those bodies in space affect other bodies in space.
Well, that's a great thrill.
It really is, and it's a lot of fun for everybody because they come out of it, they're laughing, they're like, "Oh my God, like I can't." It's like Dodge 'em and bumper cars, you know. And you go, "Geez, I'm just standing here, and I can't even just stand here quietly without somebody bumping into me, or when they're not looking, or
Yeah.
like walking so close to me and then having to change their lane because they're on their cell phone and they don't see me until the last minute." Or, we did this with Jim Wagner in New York City. Many, many years ago, like 10 years ago, probably at one of his seminars in New York City, a week-long seminar. We went out in the city and we did these drills. We did these drills in stairwells. Did some of the knife work with the paint and dye, which are actually kind of cool. But the basic awareness drills of, hey, we're just going to go out into the city, and I'm going to ask you to do these specific tasks. You're going to have to perform these things and just come back with your observations. And it's amazing how much, when you are actually aware of everything that you do, you become hypervigilant for a particular moment in time. You realize how much your own awareness affects everybody else around you without them even noticing, and how if you don't pay attention to their awareness or their lack of awareness, how just not paying attention to somebody else's lack of awareness can
Mhm.
get you into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Not just being aware, but having to focus on someone else's lack of awareness. It's
I'm
an
aware
interesting
that you're not aware that I'm aware. Are you aware of that?
It becomes Kafkaesque.
Yeah.
It
I know.
really does.
I was actually going with Laurel and Hardy, but shows which one of us is more educated.
I don't know about that, but
Yeah. Wow. Well, this was a great conversation, Richard. I really appreciate it, and I hope it's been useful to the folks who are watching. Real quick, anybody who is watching, if you're lucky enough to live in Massachusetts, you are close enough to train at Premier Martial Arts, which is Richard's school.
it's actually Prevail Martial Arts.
Premier. I said Premier, and those guys are
Yes.
actually kind of
Yeah.
cheesy.
Oh,
That
we're in
is,
Amherst, New Hampshire. It's Prevail Martial Arts and Fitness in
yeah.
Amherst, New Hampshire. Um, and do you mind if I give a shameless plug here for a moment?
Oh, please, shameless plug all the way.
Okay. So it's Prevail Martial Arts and Fitness in Amherst, New Hampshire. We teach mixed martial arts, traditional martial arts, yoga, meditation, and we also have a pretty good reality-based self-defense program. We teach fast defense. We own fast suits, Blower high gear suits, and we have about 4,000 square feet. We have 2,000 square feet of mat. We have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program, Muay Thai. But we're in a non-competitive, welcoming environment where we have a lot of fun. And one of the big features of our training facility is that we develop a particularly intelligent way of teaching and explaining and modeling human behavior. You can hear a lot about it on our podcast at prevail.podbean.com. We've had a lot of great guests, and hopefully I'd love to have Jason. I'd love to just interview you as an interview on my podcast sometime, but so I also have a podcast that's connected to that. But I'm really fascinated by the capacity that these types of conversations have to build useful models for understanding human behavior,
Yes.
and as a whole, and not just memorizing or mastering technique or physical skills, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. The idea that I think gets missed in a lot of martial arts training today is that that technique that you learn isn't really a response to a certain situation. It's a lesson plan. It's a curriculum.
Yeah.
We're exploring any number of phenomena in human interaction, and that does include violence, but it also includes basic conversation, it includes direction of energy, it includes awareness. So many things can be done from just that one move that I think a lot of people focus on just the physical and the combative. And one of the things I love about your program is that you very much don't do that.
One of the things that Rory Miller said that it just sticks with me, and I'm on it lately, is we tend to think of violence um, uh, as an isolated thing, and but it's really just a form of communication. That violence exists on a large continuum of human communication. It's just a form of human communication. And there are all sorts of levels of conflict that are associated with it, but that it all exists within this larger context of human communication, of interpersonal and intrapersonal communication. And that any discussion that we have about safety, about violence, about conflict, about awareness has to take part as within the context of that larger model of human communication.
Outstanding. Well, I think we're about out of time for today, but you close your podcast with one of the most powerful sentences that I've heard people say, and I'd love it if you close us out with it.
Thanks, brother. This is like my trademark sentence, and it's just something that I've always felt, and something that was really taught to me and inculcated in me by my Zen teachers, by the late John Daido Loori, and by Shugen Sensei and Ryushin Sensei, and all the people there. But it's the mantra that we have at our training academy, and it's something that I really, truly, firmly believe. Because if it wasn't true, I wouldn't be here today having this conversation. But to say goodnight to everyone. Take this to heart, that you, each and every one of you, we are stronger than we think we are.